This is the sixth and final annual lecture on aspects of museum studies that have honored the life and work of Patricia Whitesell. She was former director, as many of you know, of the University of Michigan's Detroit Observatory, which is located near the medical campus. It was while serving with former Vice President for Research Homer Neal that Patricia Whitesell developed a proposal to restore the university's Detroit Observatory, and despite its status as one of the oldest surviving buildings on the Ann Arbor campus, the building was in really poor condition. So with funding provided by a variety of sources over a period of 4 years, she worked tirelessly to oversee the completed restoration of the building. And for those of you who have not been to the observatory, I invite you to go, check the website to find out when you can go in the evening and look through its historic telescopes and see the stars. It's a great place. When ill health forced her to retire from that work in 2005, responsibilities for the observatory passed to the Bentley Historical Library, which I guess is why I'm standing here tonight. So since this is the final lecture in the series, we have prepared a plaque that will be placed in the observatory that honors Dr. Whitesell and her work, as well as the work of countless others who over many decades worked to ensure that this historic building and its context would survive. So we are pleased tonight to continue this lecture series. Over the 6 years, we have learned a great deal about the purpose and use of objects, in this case, a large complex object. So I'm particularly pleased that this lecture series is co-sponsored with the program in Museum Studies. And I want to thank Ray Silverman, Brad Taylor, and all those connected with the Museum Studies program for joining with us in this fruitful collaboration. I also want to again acknowledge John Wolfe, Dr. Whitesell's husband, who has contributed generously for this memorial in her honor. So it now gives me great pleasure to, at this point, introduce Ray Silverman, Director of the Program in Museum Studies. He is also Professor of African and African American Studies and Professor of Art History. He will introduce tonight's speaker. So, Ray?
Thanks very much, Fran. It's a real pleasure to see so many people in the audience. I think this is a testimony to and a tribute to the memory of Sandy Whitesell, and also the heightened interest in today's guest. Delighted to welcome you to the 2012 Whitesell Lecture, organized by the Museum Studies program in collaboration with the Bentley Historical Library. This is the sixth and final year of a series of lectures that, as Fran has mentioned, were conceived as a tribute to Patricia Whitesell. Over the last 6 years, we've had a number of dynamic guests speaking about a range of important topics pertaining to the role of museums in society. In 2007, Alice Greenwald shared insights into the planning process for the memorial at Ground Zero in New York City. The following year, Harold Scramstead offered his vision of the evolution of American museums in the 21st century. In 2009, Sharon McDonald discussed how museums deal with what she referred to as difficult heritage in places like Nuremberg, Germany. In 2010, Ivan Karp spoke about the current practices and future possibilities for how museums and communities engage one another. And late last year, Andrew McClellan addressed the dialectical relationship between public and private collections and museums, focusing in particular on the tensions between modes of display and visitor engagement. This year, the final year of the Whitesell Lectures, we thought it fitting to invite someone who has devoted his career to interpreting the astronomic sciences for the public to talk about how museums, specifically planetaria, engage the public. This evening, it is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce Derrick Pitts. Dr. Derrick Pitts has been associated with the Franklin Institute since 1978, where he has designed many of the museum's public programs and exhibits. His current roles include those of senior scientist, chief astronomer, planetarium director, and exhibit developer. As a planetarian, Derrick Pitts has held the titles of Chief Astronomer and Director of the Fels Planetarium since 1990 and has written and produced more than 24 planetarium programs. He served as the U.S. national spokesperson for the International Astronomical Union's International Year of Astronomy 2009, and currently is a NASA Solar System ambassador. In his internationally recognized work, Dr. Pitts strives to ensure that everyone can come to appreciate the universe as he sees it. He presents not a watered-down sketch of the universe, but a rich, deep, complex interpretation of current scientific research that is accessible to broad audiences. Dr. Pitts has authored numerous astronomy columns for newspapers and national magazines. He appears regularly on the major television networks as a science content expert, and for nearly two decades has hosted award-winning astronomy radio programs for both adults and children. He is an on-air contributor for Current TV's Countdown with Keith Olbermann and for CNN International, as well as for MSNBC. He recently appeared on The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson, as well as on Comedy Central's Colbert Report. And I figure if he can handle Stephen Colbert, he can certainly handle us. Among Dr. Pitt's many awards are the Philadelphia Mayor's Liberty Bell, the St. Lawrence University Distinguished Alumni Award, the G.W. Carver Medal, and Please Touch Me Museum's Great Friend to Kids Award. He has been inducted into the Germantown Historical Society Hall of Fame, and a few years ago was identified as one of the 50 most important blacks in research science by Science Spectrum magazine. In 2010, he was the inaugural recipient of the David Rittenhouse Award, and in 2011, he was awarded an honorary Doctor of Science degree from LaSalle University. This evening, Dr. Pitts will be speaking about planetariums. Only a decade ago, they were the theaters of time and space and the mediators between the general public and the wonders of astronomy. Derrick Pitts will be exploring what planetaria have become and also thinking about what they might be in the future. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Pitts to U of M.
Thank you very much for a great introduction. When I hear stuff like that, I often wonder, who are they speaking about? Is that really me? And while it is billed as a lecture, working in the informal science education industry, we don't so much lecture as we ramble on for a long time about something. But this is a topic that actually is very near and dear to my heart because I've spent a lot of time working in planetariums. I've been at the Franklin Institute now 34 years. And in that 34-year time, I think I've spent about 30 of those years in the dark. It's not possible for me to look like a mushroom, but for those of you that work in a planetarium, you'll understand what I mean. I think I've spent more time in the Franklin Institute between the hours of 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. than anyone else. Tweaking planetarium shows, building equipment, testing equipment, putting things in, all that sort of stuff. So my experience in the planetarium has covered everything, really, because in the history of the Fels Planetarium, we've done a number of major renovations. I've been around for a good many of them. I've also spent a tremendous amount of time talking with colleagues about planetarium programming and equipment and all those other different aspects, and have spent a lot of time creating and producing planetarium shows. So this particular topic actually is incredibly important because of where the planetarium stands right now. In a way, the planetarium has been at a crossroads of its function and capability for a couple of years now, and I'll explain that as we go on through the presentation. But the way I'd like to start this is just to remind everyone of what their experience has been like. Let's go back to your first experience in a planetarium. Think for a moment what it was like when you first visited a planetarium, when you saw your first planetarium show. I do not mean the one when you were in the back row with your boy or girlfriend in the dark. It's not what I mean. Your first astronomical, mediated astronomy experience in a planetarium theater. You remember the experience of the soothing voice over the PA system, the wonderful ethereal music, the darkening of the theater as sunset comes, the revelation of the stars, the beautiful, stunningly gorgeous star field, and almost the communal expression of satisfaction that you can, if you didn't hear it, you could certainly sense that it was there, of everybody going, when you see that gorgeous star field. And the program continues. The lecturer tackles a topic and presents that, hopefully in a palatable, acceptable, accessible way. You get some content through the program. You come to the end of the program where there may have been a sunrise, or there could have been some other wonderful visual resolving experience. The music swells and the lights come up again, and you bring yourself back to Earth. Now, what happened between the sunset and the sunrise, you may not remember, but you remember all the other great stuff. You remembered the introduction and you remembered the exit from this, but you remember the star field. And so the purpose of the planetarium from its outset has been to give people this great experience of the night sky, in which they get to see a really nice night sky. They get to learn quite a bit about various aspects of astronomy under the night sky, mostly observational when many of you had your first experience. But all in all, it was meant to provide a really wonderful experience with astronomy. The planetarium continues to do that, but the way in which that is being done is shifting, is changing a tremendous amount. And it was not long ago that planetariums found themselves in a really interesting position. And that interesting position actually was that the planetarium stood for quite a long time, from the inception of the planetarium about the early 1930s up until about the 1980s or 90s, as the theater experience to have in a science museum. At the Franklin Institute Science Museum, there's absolutely no question that the Fels Planetarium stands out as the one experience you want to have, the one major visual experience you want to have. And planetariums of that type, of that time and that era, could create all sorts of wonderful visual experiences. Well, with the advent of the large format film industry, when the IMAX industry comes to the science museum industry, a very interesting thing happens. What happens is that tremendous visual satisfactory experience suddenly gets sucked out of the planetarium and is deposited over here in the IMAX theater. Now, for many large museums like Franklin Institute, this is a very important development. And the reason why is because the IMAX model does a great job at providing a very, very solid and large revenue stream. Now, for great institutions, it's very important. These institutions must have the money monster fed. And IMAX is doing a wonderful job of feeding the money monster. It's very attractive. Everybody wants to learn about it. It's a large format. It's a new format. Everyone is excited about this. But it does cost money, and it's a big investment. So institutions find that they have to do one or the other. It hasn't really come to pass at that time, in the early 1990s, that you can blend the two together in a way that works successfully. So what happens is that the planetarium begins to suffer while the IMAX theaters emerge. Now, planetariums are still doing a fabulous job of teaching with entertainment, doing a great job at this. However, IMAX has two tricks that work really well for it. The one trick that IMAX has that really works well for it is that it's big and bright. Now, you all know how this can work with individuals. If you wave a bright and shiny object at people, they'll jump at it. IMAX has that going for it. And then it has one other trick, and that trick is to take you over the edge of anything. To have the ground suddenly disappear out from underneath you and give you a great panoramic view right off of the edge of the cliff. Wow, fantastic. How many times can you do that in an IMAX film? Well, it lasted for quite some time, actually. Here we are now at 2012, and so I'd say that it lasted for a good 22 years or so. Now IMAX theaters are just beginning or realizing that they've almost come to the end of their experience. Where have planetaria been behind all this? Well, let's take a look and see. You, of course, recall this experience of the Planetarium Theater. You go in, there's a beautiful panoramic view around the lower edge of the dome, there's a gorgeous star field, and as I mentioned, the lecturer is taking you around through the star field and explaining so many different things. You recall that experience. But planetariums went from this over to this. A very, very different experience. If I put it in scientific terms, I say, the planetarium goes from the Ptolemaic model of examining the solar system, looking at the sky and the solar system from the surface of the Earth, just looking up, basically speaking, to being able to take people off of the surface of the Earth. What's the premier experience of the planetarium nowadays in a new version of the planetarium? It is to lift the audience up off the surface of the Earth, back away enough to show them the solar system in its entirety, and then turn around and head outward from the solar system, passing the classic planets, showing new information, great images of what these objects look like, and the experience of flying along through space, going from one object to the other, even perhaps following the trajectory of a satellite as it investigates the outer reaches of the solar system. And the images now are so compelling, much more so than they ever could have been before in the Planetarium Theater, that you're immediately sucked into this gorgeous view of our solar system, of our galaxy, of the universe. Now, the information content that is now available in planetariums is staggering. So much astronomical information is available these days in a digital format that we can now create digital data sets that allow us to fly through our galaxy, fly through clusters of galaxies, fly through all sorts of information that were very, very difficult to reproduce in any other meaningful way before. But now we can not only display these great rich colors and move around all of them in so many different ways, in 3 dimensions really, but we can take people through the data sets and help them understand the importance of the data set and the importance of the work being done by astronomers that create these data sets. In other words, what's happening is we're beginning to redefine the visual experience of the night sky, the visual experience of our galaxy, the visual experience of the universe for the new visitors in the new planetariums. What you saw just before was an edge-on view of a spiral galaxy. In a large volumetric version of this image, where you have the 3-dimensional sense of it, we can actually fly right up to the edge of this and have the stars begin to define themselves individually, and then we can fly through the star field itself of that galaxy, turn around and head toward the core of the galaxy, do all sorts of really great things like that that never were possible before. We can take all of the information that's known about how the galaxies are structured throughout the universe, not only plot those, but fly through those as well, show how the clustering is put together. And we can go as far out as we'd like in the universe, all the way out past all the clustered structure of the universe and head on out to what is now known as the baby picture of the universe. This is some of the earliest data available about how the universe managed to form itself in the way that we see it today. It is a remarkable experience to have in a planetarium these days. It's an entirely new place. It is not your grandfather's planetarium anymore. It's a stunning experience. In fact, I'm willing to go so far as to say that the best outfitted of these theaters are the best visual theaters you can find anywhere on the planet. The resolutions are incredibly high, the detail is fantastic, the colors are rich and highly saturated, the flight experience is remarkable, and I can't think of any other medium where you can fly so intimately through the universe. Planetariums all across the world are beginning to do this now. That's what we're seeing of the new planetariums. But this is just what we see on the surface of the new planetariums, this great visual experience. But is that everything there is to the new planetariums? No, it isn't. But let's go back and start here. Planetariums first began back in around 1919. Walter Bauersfeld from the Zeiss company in Germany in 1919 proposed this idea about the planetarium. It was at first rejected, but he went on to prove the case that this would be a great thing to do, and he did so, creating the Zeiss Mark I in 1923. As you can see, this projector doesn't look anything like that great old projector that many of us had been used to seeing in theaters. You remember what that planetarium looked like. You know the term, you called it the ant, because it looked like a big bug. For those that had experience with the largest of these projectors, it added a certain kind of mystique to the planetarium program, because there in the dark, silently, this projector is moving and turning, creating the star field image that you see. So that was part of the great experience. What is this projector? What is it doing in the dark? And you never saw a machine like this before anywhere else. Well, this is the predecessor to that. It's the Mark I. It's a single north hemisphere, if you will. It has 31 projectors with 32 glass photoplates. It uses a 200-watt lamp, and they, in later editions, used copper foil between the glass plates to create the stars. How did they create the stars? Well, what they did was, since they were photographic plates, they simply created a photographic image of black dots on a white sheet of paper. They photographed that and then used the negative for that, punched holes in that, and that became the star plate for the star projector. This is the very earliest one. You can see down here on this side of the projection system here, as we look at this, so here's the drawing here, here's the actual device. This section right in here holds what are called the planet cages, and the planet projectors all rotate around the central axis right here. And of course, here are the field lenses. The star plates are right here in this portion of the lens assembly, and right here is the lamp that sits on the inside. Every one of these little assemblies that you see here that are backed by a star plate and a lens to gather the light to focus it through the projection lens on the front has a little shutter system, so that as the projector rotates, it can cut off at the horizon the projection of the stars out onto the dome. This is why when you went to the planetarium theater, you very rarely saw stars down below the edge of the dome. So this is a brilliant device that really brought home the idea of how these projectors can be used. It became the world's first planetarium. It's set up here on the roof and then moved to the Deutsches Museum in 1925. Look at that dome. That's incredible. Just incredible. So here's what the earliest Zeiss Mark II or Model 2 planetarium looked like. That big bug that we are familiar with from our early experience in the planetarium. There's a small bug here at University of Michigan. It's the Zeiss ZKP projector that is currently over in the astronomy building. Do I have that right? Yeah, right location? I was there earlier today. It's a great... Actually, in Angel Hall, yes. I'm still learning the map of the campus. But I saw it earlier today. It's a great little projector that does a fabulous job of projecting a beautiful star field in that theater. And so this is the big version of that. And you can see now this dumbbell shape has evolved so that there's a northern star ball, a southern star ball. The planet cages are now extended across from the central mass of the instrument here. And the instrument now is built in such a way that it can show the stars from any place on the surface of the Earth at all. Not only does it show the stars, the planets, the sun, and the moon, but it also shows the constellation names with little tiny balls on the back end here. And it also has constellation outline projectors that are hung around the center of the planetarium device right here. You can see that this one is set up on wheels. I was told when I started working at Fels Planetarium that the reason why the projector was set up on wheels is so that they could roll the projector out to the side of the theater and they could set up a boxing ring in the center to do boxing matches. I really did feel as if someone was pulling my leg on that account. And then we graduate, here's the extent of the distribution of these planetariums, the early Mark II planetariums. And here you can see how they come to the US. These are the first 5 of the planetariums in the United States to use projectors like this. And at the time, there is no other planetarium available in the world really for use. It is these. Now, there are 4 runners to the planetarium as we know it now, but nothing like what we know of and nothing that directly connects to where planetariums are now, so I thought I'd stay just with these. Adler's first, Philadelphia second, so on and so forth, on down through Buell here. Interestingly, as I mentioned at dinner, the design element, aesthetic of the architecture of these buildings was very, very similar since they were all created around the same time. Adler in Chicago, Fels in Philadelphia, and Griffith in Los Angeles are the only 2 that retain that really distinctive early 1930s design aesthetic. And it really is wonderful to see that. You can see it when you go to either one of these places, even though Adler has changed dramatically. Griffith has done a lot of change on the interior, but the exterior still looks the same. Philadelphia, somewhat like Fels, has its design element for the planetarium found within the museum building. At the same time, Adler stands as an individual planetarium theater with a museum. Fels is part of the Franklin Institute Science Museum, originally founded in 1824, but moved to the Science Building location on the Parkway in 1933. Griffith at Los Angeles stands alone. Hayden in New York is part of the American Museum of Natural History and has recently undergone a major renovation, which has rendered it to look incredibly modernistic and does not represent what it looked like at all when it first started, but at the same time has taken very big steps forward in the change from one type of planetarium to another. Buell has also done the same thing. Its original planetarium building and projector still exist, but are being used in completely different ways now, while the actual real planetarium is over at the Carnegie Science Center and is a very, very modern facility. I put all this in so you have some context for where this all comes from. The electromechanical projector as the king of projection technology from the 1930s outside of film up until probably the late 1970s, early 1980s. So, at the Franklin Institute, a very interesting thing happens on opening night. The Fels Planetarium is due to open on November 6, 1933. The planetarium itself is donated to the Franklin Institute by Samuel Fels of the Fels family. If you're familiar with Fels Naphtha soap, it's that family. The foundation donates the instrument to the Franklin Institute, but it goes like this. The story I understand is that Samuel Fels and Max Adler of Chicago are good friends. They're traveling companions. In fact, as I understand it, Max Adler has a brother that lives in Europe. His brother lives in Europe because the brother and Max do not get along very well. In fact, they get along so poorly that they won't even be on the same continent with each other. So the story was the brother was coming from Europe to the US. In doing so, this brother, Max, had to leave to go to Europe. So he's going to go to Europe so he can check on a projector that he's having built for Adler Planetarium. He invites his friend Samuel Fels to travel along with him. Fels goes on the trip. They go to Jena, Germany, where they look at the construction of the projector. And Fels says, "We need one of these in Philadelphia." So, on the spot, he buys the projector for $75,000, but doesn't have a place for it. He has an idea that he'll have it placed at University of Pennsylvania. When he comes back to the States, he goes to Penn and he says, "I've done this wonderful thing. I've bought you a planetarium projector," to which they say, we don't really want it. We don't know what to do with it, and we don't know what kind of upkeep will be necessary for it going forward into the future. So we're going to turn you down on this. The Franklin Institute Science Museum is in the design phase at this point in 1930, 1931. So Fels comes to the Franklin Institute, offers the projector there. Franklin Institute enthusiastically accepts it and becomes the second location in the United States to have a planetarium. So back in 1933, November 6th, opening night, everyone is there for the opening of this great new device, this incredible device that not only puts the Franklin Institute on the map, puts Philadelphia on the map, gives it a level of importance and cachet it may not have had before, because here we are in the early 1930s at a time when astronomy is beginning to explode in ways that people have not been able to understand or grab hold of before, but now the Franklin Institute is going to make it possible for people to understand. Everyone is gathered at the planetarium. The doors have been opened, people have come in to sit, all the dignitaries of the city are there. They're waiting for just one person, Samuel Fels. Well, Fels is late. In fact, he's late enough that they find they must start the program without him. So they close the doors to the planetarium and begin the first program. About 15 minutes later, an elderly man toddles in. I'm here to see the planetarium show. The guard at the door says, "I'm sorry, sir. They've already started the show and closed the doors. You can't get in." Fels says, "Oh, well, I'll just sit here on this bench until the show is over," which he did. And he sat there until the show was over. So he missed the first show. But from that point on, the Fels Planetarium is doing shows every day, right up to today. So it has had a great run of entertaining people in the Delaware Valley. My estimation is that about 9 million people have sat under our planetarium dome in the time that it's been there. So that's pretty good. But Zeiss isn't the only group that's making planetariums. As it turns out, as we go on later in time, there are other planetaria that come up. There's a hybrid planetarium at a hybrid projector at the planetarium in San Francisco at the Morrison Planetarium. Hybrid in that the star balls are brought together at the center, the planet cages are on the outside. So it looks kind of weird. But Spitz, Goto, Minolta, the Korkos brothers in Boston also are creating projectors. And the projectors begin to evolve. We go through the standard type of projector that we have always seen. And then what comes onto the scene are the starball projectors. And the starball projectors are different in that it's one single sphere, possibly lit by one single bright lamp. And all the other projectors for the sun, moon, and planets are all outboard. So you can see here in this example of the Starball Planetarium here, or a foreshortened version, these projectors down here act as the sun, moon, and planet projectors. And over here in the Minolta Infinium system is a similar setup where you have the star projector here and the outboard projectors here doing that work. At the same time, there are plenty of other projectors that are involved in a planetarium show. There are special effects projectors, slide projectors of all sorts. And the special effects projectors in most of the planetariums that have begun their histories in the early 1930s and have come on in the 40s and 50s all build their special effects at home. So it's all home brew stuff. Held together with what? Baling wire, chewing gum, rubber bands, spit occasionally, and all manner of things like that. But I have to really say that, in truth, the technicians that work at these theaters are highly professional and do a remarkable job at creating special effects that simulate all sorts of astronomical phenomena that you would never think would be able to be accomplished without a very, very fancy computer graphic image system. They did remarkable work creating incredible devices. And they were all extraordinarily important. They all went together to make this wonderfully unique experience. In this experience, the visuals are very, very rich and highly textured. You have a star field. You have slide projectors that create one sort of texture. You have a different set of slide projectors that create a different kind of texture but add to the overall feel. You have the special effects projectors that provide all sorts of different textures and contribute to the program. And then there's the advent and use of film at the same time that adds yet another layer. So all of these elements put together create a very, very rich production, a very, very rich presentation. And I recall that the most expensive show we ever produced at Fels Planetarium cost us about $20,000. Boy, we were spending the money on that show. Because typically shows cost about $10,000, maybe $12,000, but we had really blown the budget at $20,000, and it was a beautiful, visually rich show. A wonderful presentation, if I say so myself. But this is what the planetarium shows of this time. Now we're speaking of the late 1960s, early 1970s, and into the 1980s were very much like great shows like this. The first big change to come to the planetarium industry is this one: the advent and use of computers. Now, there were automation systems being used in planetaria, but they were mostly homebrew devices that people would jury-rig up in a back room someplace to control various projectors throughout the theater automatically. But this is what one of the first computers looked like in a planetarium system. This is essentially a PC. It's an AVL Eagle 2 projector whose primary purpose was theater projector control. They could control almost any projector in the planetarium theater, and I had my first experience with digital planetarium work in a system like this. What it does is it connects out to a group of peripheral units that then control the projectors. And what does it do? It actually makes any projector at all, any kind of projector, look like a slide projector. So what the AVL does is it produces commands for slide projectors. What has happened, though, is a company or various companies then create peripheral devices that connect to this that use those particular instructions for slide projector control to control not only slide projectors, but also special effects projectors. So in this way, you now have an automated way to control a lot of projectors at one time. What does this do for you? It allows you to have very, very high speed control of things in such a way that, for example, you can use a series of slide projectors to create a very crude form of animation. So this is a great cheap way for planetaria to do animation. Remember, this is before CGI. But the big change is that computers go from looking like this to looking like this. And now the door is opening. And the reason why the door is opening is because if you happen to have enough computing power and you can put it together with a visual projection system, you can create the world's first digital planetarium. And that was this device called Digistar. Now you can see the list of stuff down here that Digistar could do. You're no longer tied to the solar system. You can travel beyond the solar system. You can show constellation changes over periods of time. You can show proper motion. Planets and moons can be shown as dots or solids with phases. But let's get down to this part. Here's where the rubber really hits the road in this. It's a vector graphics machine. What does that mean? It means it uses points and lines to create objects. And here's an example of what that looks like. This is what the graphics look like from the Digistar system. But more importantly, what did the stars look like? You ask. Well, remember the stars of the Zeiss projection, of the Zeiss type projector? Well, the stars of this kind of projector are very different. In order to create a star, what the device essentially has to do is to put a dot on the dome and then go back and forth hitting the dot over and over and over again. What do you end up with? You end up with what looks like green puffballs for stars. Green puffballs. Sort of solid centers, but very, very fuzzy edges. This is a radical departure from the beautiful, sharp, crisp, highly defined, very high resolution stars of the standard type star projector. It's a complete step down in one sense. But on the other hand, we can do computer graphics. Wow, that's fabulous, because now we can do things out in the solar system and out in the universe that we couldn't do before. So that, in one sense, gives us a big step up. Now, if we had been paying close attention at the time, we would have seen what was coming. We would have seen that this side of the equation was really going to take off. And in doing so, we'd end up in a very different place. So here's the Planetarium Theater toolkit. You had a star projector, you had some slide projectors. We had over 100 slide projectors that we were controlling automatically at one point. We had hundreds of special effect projectors, hundreds of them. We had a great audio system with lots of power, and we had an automation system to run all the animation sequences that we were doing. If you looked at the wiring setup for the Fells Planetarium, I said this earlier to a group, if the fire marshal had seen what we had for wiring, the fire marshal would have burned the place down. It was crazy. And the reason why is very much like a lot of planetariums at the time. We were our own entity within the Franklin Institute. There were no outside technicians, no outside oversight of anything. We ran everything in the room. We built anything we needed to build, we wired anything we needed to wire, and we wired in a way that worked for us. That meant zip cord all over every place with plugs everywhere. It's a wonder the place never burned down. But this is a standard sort of planetarium theater toolkit. The question of what's missing, we'll come back to that in just a moment. So, the next step going forward for planetariums comes at a time when IMAX is really beginning to take hold in science museums in a big way. In 1990, the Franklin Institute had completed construction of a brand new wing. In the brand new wing, we acquired an atrium, a parking garage, and we got an IMAX theater. And in doing so, we had this brand new revenue stream coming into Franklin Institute that was going to bolster our revenue line and really do great wonders for us, because it would give us more resources so that we can do the kind of outreach and informal science education that really is our mission. So this is going to help to facilitate that, the IMAX theater. When the IMAX theater shows up, as I mentioned before, right away you have big, you have bright, and you have the one-trick pony of going over the edge. And everybody loves it. They love it. You can see all sorts of great things you never could see before. Trips to Hawaii. Let's go through the Grand Canyon. Let's fly in space. Let's go into caves. Let's go underwater. We don't have to get wet. We don't have to worry about oxygen. We can go to all these different environments and see all this great stuff. We can even go to one of the greatest concerts ever and see one of the greatest rock bands right up front and personal. You can see the sweat on Mick Jagger's face with no trouble at all. The flame pots are burning your skin as you sit in the theater. Everybody loves the experience. It takes over many of the institutions as being the central thing of the institution. At the same time, the other partner that goes with the IMAX theater in revenue generation is the blockbuster exhibit. These two revenue streams are able to support these very, very large institutions that have a lot of square footage and have a lot of employees getting a job done. Absolutely necessary for these places to survive. I'm not saying that Franklin could do without them. It's just the results of what happens from that. While this is going up, this toolkit now represents what's looking like the leveling out at the pinnacle of what planetariums can achieve with a basic set of equipment like this. When we look back at this time, we can see that the planetarium is becoming obsolete. It's becoming obsolete. Why is it becoming obsolete? On the one hand, because of this. When the computer moves to the desktop, all sorts of possibilities open up. Computer graphic imaging begins to show up on desktop computers or in small computer systems in places. And now with the ability to create models and with the ability to render those models and create them as full volumetric images, you now can create absolutely gorgeous images of anything you want if you can simply construct the model, put the colors, and render it out. So now on my computer desktop, I can create much better imagery than can be shown in a planetarium. This is now a problem because planetariums are beginning to slip behind in its visual capability. So, with the advent of the IMAX theater, the advent of the PC, and the ease and use of CGI software, now we get to the point where Planetarium has to start to think of what else it can do. So video shows up. First it shows up as DVDs, or a video disc, I should say, being projected by single video projectors on one window on the dome. Then come multiple windows on the dome, and then someone gets the brilliant idea to do this: electronically edge blend the video so that you can turn 3 windows into a partial scene across the bottom of the dome. But it's the electronic edge blending that stands out as the technology advancement that's going to turn everything around. Nobody sees it quite yet, but it's just about to come, because out of this grows what's called the partial dome planetarium system. Partial dome planetarium system is just a little bit less than half of the dome. That's one video image into which you can put computer graphic images. And folks, believe me, when these first came out in 1989 and 2000, some of these images were absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible. The resolution is very low. It doesn't have a whole lot of content to it. So it all looks very kludgy and clunky and not very sophisticated at all. In fact, it's looking so bad that you can see stuff on television or in movies that's way better. And so now the thought is, why do I go to a planetarium to see this kind of display when IMAX is giving me big and bright, and on my computer at home I get much better graphic images when I simply play Mario Brothers or any of the other computer games that are now using computer graphic images as their main draw? These are things now that are pushing the planetarium into obscurity. But then, in 1997, the full dome planetarium system makes its debut. SkyScan, a company in New Hampshire, releases a product called Sky Vision. It's the first full dome video system. But they don't release it until they know they have absolutely stunning images to go with it. And so they do. However, the major problem is that the projection systems are not very good. You can see the list of things that go together here for all this. I'll point out just a couple of them. First shown at the Summer IPS meeting in London in 1998. And if we come down, the price for show production skyrockets by a factor of 10. By a factor of 10. Planetariums do not have budgets to create these new programs. They simply can't do it. So the system doesn't grow very quickly because nobody can really afford to build the programs except where? Hayden Planetarium in New York. They have the money to do it. They create an incredibly expensive system, and they go about creating programs that many of us have now seen. Claude Gauthier comes to SkyScan from Brittany with a great system that now provides full dome star fields. And the reason why I mention that is because the Achilles heel in these systems for a very long time has been the capability of the projection system to put up a good image on the dome. The original video projectors don't look anything like this one. The original video projection systems that were being used were much smaller than this and simply didn't have the capability, the power output to put enough lumens out on the dome to make an image look good. They also didn't have the lenses that were built to make the image look good. We're using projectors that come from other industries altogether. It's not until like the last 5, 6, 7 years that manufacturers have begun to devise projectors that work in a planetarium environment. Remember, video projectors at that time in the late 1990s, early 2000s, were meant to just do short distance work. They're not meant to cover large hemispherical surfaces over a 60-foot throw distance. So you don't have really good imagery coming out, you don't have really good projection. But once that starts to happen, things begin to change dramatically. So Hayden in New York creates a great system, a very, very expensive system, prohibitively expensive, by the way, and that really gets things started off and rolling in the full dome system. However, there are all sorts of hardware and software problems in the digital systems. We'll get to some of those in just a second so you can understand how they work. But the way it basically works is, what you're doing is, everything now that is projected by the Planetarium system, that was projected by that Planetarium basic toolkit from before, is now done as computer graphic images. The star field is done that way. The planets are done that way. All of these different things that were done in a different way before are now being done as CGI. And essentially, it's a great system because, if you think about it, a star field is nothing but a bunch of points, just plotted out on a surface. But it's how you can manipulate those points that makes the great difference in a full dome system. Because now what you can do is, with those points that can be plotted in 3 dimensions, you can fly through them in all sorts of ways, as I pointed out at the very top of the program. So, the way it works in this dome system is this. These are the grids that are projected in a 6-channel system. There's one of these sections of the dome for each projector. Content is fed from a server to a master computer that then assembles them all and then cuts them into the various channels that you need. And here's the edge of a channel right here. The column here, of course, hides those quite nicely, so you can sort of camouflage them right there. And that creates the full dome experience that you see. And each one of these projectors is fed by a computer that then takes it to a master computer that puts it out onto the dome. You can do anything this way. You can create any kind of imagery you want. Anything. But in planetariums, of course, they start out as what? Astronomy content. Of course, astronomy content. And so, nowadays, not only can you do any kind of astronomy content you want in a full dome environment, but now you can do it like this, as full dome 3D. Wow! You get the glasses and everything, so you can do the same trick that IMAX does of, having things come out of the screen toward you and all sorts of cool stuff like that. But with any kind of content you like. And this really does now step up what planetariums can do. Now we can fly you through the rings of Saturn. We can fly you through all the chunks of material in the rings. We can fly you through an asteroid field. We can fly you around a planet. In fact, what we can do is we can bring an object in 3D full dome right up to you and have it sit right in front of you as if you could grab hold of it. And of course, the resolutions now are up to 4K by 4K, 8K by 8K. So you have an enormous amount of information on the screen, providing brightness, color, resolution, detail, everything to make the experience look hyper-realistic. It is rich. So here you can go. You can fly into the rings of Saturn. You can go out to an observatory and stand out in front of the domes of the VLA as if you're actually there. I just took this from a plan view of what it looks like from the outside of the Planetarium Theater with the projector here in the center and the viewer sitting here so they can calculate the viewing angle. You can go out into space and travel with astronauts as they work on International Space Station. And not only can you do this through CGI, but nowadays we can actually take the video itself and digitize it in such a way that we can put it up on the dome and give you a truly immersive feel of actually being there with the astronaut. So, when you look at these two projection systems, it comes out like this. Let's work with the electromechanical first. You have the most realistic star field of all. To this day, the star fields produced by the old projectors are far superior to the digital projector star fields. But these old machines had a simple operation. They have a non-volatile memory, if you will. You just turn the thing on and turn it off. You don't lose anything. They give an aesthetically pleasing experience, and it's the Ptolemaic view that's closest to the visitor experience, and it has a very long life. On the other end, they need all sorts of additional visual support. Again, they do have that Ptolemaic view, so you're limited to what you can see from the surface of the planet, and there's a very expensive capital outlay at the beginning. How about the digital side? There's no limit to what you can do. You can go anywhere, you can do anything. Not just astronomical. The word anything here really applies. I can go anywhere I want. I can create any environment I like. I can go inside pyramids. I can go down to the Marianas Trench. I can go to the surface of the moon. I can go to the interior of a nebula. I can go to the interior of a star if I like. I can go to any place I can dream up. Any place. It's phenomenal what can be done. But that's an important catch point. You eliminate the need for all other projectors. You also eliminate the need for in-house show production teams. Why? Because it's ridiculously expensive to do this. If you want to put something on a dome, in full dome, a full show, it's going to cost you at least $700,000. At least $700,000. If you want something really good, it's going to cost you twice that. If you want something New York quality killer, it's going to cost you $3 or $4 million. Who has the money to create programs like that? It seems like only New York is burning money that way. The other places around the country simply don't have those resources. When we put the first full dome system into the Franklin Institute, I asked the folks at Franklin, would they support the expense of creating programs like this, and they told me yes, when I made the proposal to do this. When we got the system in, and I went back and said, I now need $400,000 to produce the first show, they said, are you kidding? There's no way you're going to get that. We'll give you $25,000. Do what you can. And what has developed out of that is there are a number of houses, production houses, not many, and some planetariums that produce shows for all of us in the planetarium industry in full dome. You can lease the shows. The costs are on a sliding scale. It can range anywhere from $2,000 to $25,000, $35,000 or so, depending upon what the product is. But you'll pay for it for sure, and it will be expensive because it's nearly impossible for anybody else to produce a show. We have to get together as consortia to throw money together in order to produce programming. It is so expensive. And the production values are very high, but there are the cons. The projectors are just catching up with the applications. The stars in the projection system, in the digital projection systems, look nice, but they are nowhere near as realistic as the brute force projectors are. Part of the reason why is because it's very, very difficult for a video projector to project pure black. It's very hard to project pure black. And that's what you need for the stars to stand out in such a way as to make them look most realistic, is you need that really dark, purple, nearly black, velvety background that we see when we see stars in places where the sky is really dark and clear. So you lose a bit of reality when you use those star fields. Yet, we can do so much with those star fields. We can manipulate them in so many different ways. It makes a tremendous teaching tool for almost every kind of astronomy there is. Far better than the original electromechanical optical projector. You do need a really highly specialized staff. We don't have one at Franklin. We're not going to get one. There is a very high memory demand, but it's almost like watching Science Channel TV. In fact, if you ask the folks that work at planetariums with full dome video systems, what does the audience call the medium they're seeing? The movie. The movie? You mean like the IMAX movie? Bite your tongue. What a terrible thing to say. But the production values are so high now. It looks so hyper-realistic. It's beautifully rich, but it does look very much like that. Add to that a lot of the programming is just 23 to 25 minutes. So it's almost like watching a 30-minute television program. And it also has a very sterile kind of feeling to it. And it has one kind of texture, just one, the video CGI texture. So in many ways, it strips out the character of the production of the independent theaters when these presentations are shown. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that they're not good systems. What I'm saying is that there are pros and cons about what you choose to use. And this is the experience that we hope people will have when they come to our planetarium theaters. We hope that what they're going to feel is this great exhilaration, this fabulous feeling of having a tremendous visual experience in which they learn a tremendous amount about astronomy and they have a really good time, enough so that they become repeat visitors over and over and over to come enjoy our presentations. But if you go back a couple of slides here, I asked the question, what's missing? What's missing? One of the things that I have found is missing is that, or let me do it this way, at the point where video first came on board for planetariums and began to change our lot, the planetariums were about a dozen years away, not from collapse, but from becoming almost completely irrelevant. Here's what I mean. Yes, we can still teach astronomy well. We can still do that. But what we can't do is we cannot provide the kind of visual experience that our patrons can get on their big screen TV at home. We were not able to do that. With the advent of edge blending technology, partial dome, and now a full dome, with the richness of the video that we can have through CGI, we now have the most capable video projection theaters anywhere, far superior to any other theater any place. Movies, you say? Yes, film is great, but in full dome video, I can take you any place. Film can't go. So that's a great asset. At the same time, though, what began to happen is the turnaround that brought planetariums back because of all this. No longer on the edge of irrelevancy as far as visual experience is concerned. We have this great capability. But what is it that's missing? Here's what I find is missing these days. It's a simple statement. You've heard it a zillion times before. It's the story, stupid. It's the story. It's the content. What kind of content do we have available? Yes, there is content, but what's the quality of that content that's available? Is it anywhere near as deep and rich as it had been in the previous iteration of planetarium theaters? No, it actually isn't. In fact, I find it hard to select a planetarium show to present in our theater because I find so many of them are so much vaporware. Great visuals, but no content. Why? Because it seems as if what the producers have done is they've grabbed every wonderful visual image they can think, put it together in an arrangement, and then said, let's write a show around these visuals. When it's the story that's most important. The story that's most important. The story should always come first. The visuals are there to support it. Yes, the full dome systems are tremendous. They have unbelievable capability. As far as I see in this industry, many of us are still playing with the equipment. And that's what we do. Oh, I got new computers this year. Well, I got new servers. Well, I'm getting new projectors. I have great new lenses. Okay. But I'll tell you, I remember going to the IPS meeting in Montreal almost 20 years ago now, and I saw what I still think is probably one of the best programs I ever saw. It was Le Petit Prince, presented in the Planetarium show in Montreal. It had minimal visuals, but the story and the way it was produced and put together and told stays with me even today, after having seen dozens of full dome planetarium programs about all sorts of subjects. It's the way the story that was put together that was so compelling that I remember it so well. Nowadays, the hump we have to get over in this business is, how do we produce for this system? It seems to me that we are just beginning to understand how to use this system to its fullest advantage to tell a story. We've been too long dazzled by the same sort of thing as the IMAX experience. It's big, it's bright, it does tricks. Now, the astronomical stuff is phenomenal. Why? Because we can now take data sets created by astronomers, put them into a visualization system, and show astronomers things about their data that they never could see before or would never have access to understanding before. That's a tremendous leap forward. We can now take that information, put it into a context, and present it to a public audience and have them understand astronomy in ways they have never been able to understand it before. This is a tremendous step forward in our ability to help people understand our universe. But we still need to learn how to tell a story. And this is where I think these systems are now struggling. What else can we do to enhance the system? Well, we can provide more memory, we can make greater resolution in the images, we can go 8K by 8K or 12K or 16K, we can add full motion video, any of those sorts of things. We can do all that. But does it really get us to the essence of what the experience is supposed to be? Without the story, it's just so many pretty pictures, I think. So I look forward to us being able to do quite a bit better in the future. What's coming in the future for these systems? I don't think the digital system is going to disappear. What is going to happen is that people are going to make choices about what they want to use their theaters for. If you're a teaching facility, then you might be better off with a standard star projector. If you're a facility that has to entertain large audiences on a quick turnaround and you need to dazzle them, maybe full dome video with 3D is what you need. Can you blend these things together? Sure, there might be a way for you to segment your schedule during the course of the day where you can do education with one kind of system, you can do entertainment with a different kind of system. I'm not saying that you can't blend education and entertainment, but what's the equipment you're going to choose to do the best job you can for what it is, for what your mission and objectives are? Will the star fields of digital systems ever become good enough? I don't think they'll ever be able to replace the brute force projectors, but they can still get better. The projectors need to get better in order for that to happen. So in the future, the things I think need to take place. We need better projectors. We can raise the resolution so the star fields get better. And more importantly than anything else, we can learn how to produce for the medium. That's what we all need to do in this industry. Many of us that are still in this industry today, I'm almost calling myself a dinosaur in this case, come from an era when the special effects that we built were built with black electrician's tape, sawed-off Coke bottles, broken up plastic cocktail glasses, and transparent, multicolored paint on glass chips of various kinds. And these things looked good for the time, but not anymore. It's a completely different era, and many of us are still back there. So the last thing I'd like to do is I'd like to show you just this one piece. It's impossible for me to properly represent, describe what this new experience is like of the full dome theater. You have a theater here that is a digital theater. If you have not been to the digital theater here, you really need to go. Why? Because the experience you have there of what these digital theaters can do with a star field as far as taking you out into the universe will completely change your life. You'll go outside that night, look up, and see the sky in a completely different way. You'll understand the three-dimensional nature of what you see above your heads, and it will be staggering. I can't show you that here, but at the very least, I can show you some of the samples of what this stuff looks like. This is a demo that comes from SkyScan's Digital Sky 2. Oh, the thing I should mention, there's one other little piece I should mention about this digital thing. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it. Almost everybody. Everybody who can afford it. are doing it. And that's the reason why that's part of the reason why we're not going to go backwards. Some places will continue to keep a star projector. Some places will go to digital. Some places will put the two together. It all depends what you want to do in your mission. But everybody's doing it. So theaters across the world are not only converting, but new theaters are opening up with this new capability to do all this stuff. So that's an important piece of it too. I think there are about 3,000 planetariums across the world. And there are new planetariums, about 60 new planetariums coming on. Maybe that number's a little bit too high. I think it's about 30 new planetariums are coming online every year. But they're starting with the digital equipment now and moving forward. So that's an important part of that. The folks that provide the content, Skyscan is one of them. They've always been a leader in this field, and I thought I would take some of their examples to show you. The digital revolution has engulfed the planetarium industry. Whether the planetarium industry or how soon the planetarium industry learns what to do with its new digital capability remains to be seen. Yes, there are some good and interesting shows out there, but there aren't as many as there should be commensurate with the capability of the system. I should mention that the folks that are here at University of Michigan working in the planetariums here clearly understand the power of these systems and use them to teach all the time now. Doesn't matter that the planetarium dome is maybe smaller than others. Ours is an 18-meter dome. But the folks that are doing the work here are killing it in ways that we can't do at our place. You should be very, very pleased and proud with what they're doing. They're doing a superior job. And they should continue to do that because the outreach stuff that they talk about and how they seem to have that plan seems to go right down the line of using this equipment to its best capability. And so I commend them and congratulate them on the great work that they're doing. So keep your eyes on the planetarium industry. I'm sure you'll see some of those great developments of how it can be used right here in your own little planetariums here at University of Michigan. I hope the presentation has helped to illuminate a lot of the issues about these planetariums and how they work and what they can do. I thank you for your attention, and thank you so much for having me here to talk about this. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Does that mean that there simply isn't a market for the ant-type shows? Because you are still saying that the ant still gives a superior experience of the night sky. And now, more than ever, nobody has ever seen the night sky anymore. So I feel like, in a sense, that is more important than ever.
Of the 3,000 or so planetariums there are around the world, the vast majority of them are school planetariums, small installations in schools around the world. And these planetariums often are on a mission track that not requires them, but is best served by the brute force planetarium projection system. And you can then supplement the brute force planetarium system with a video projection system that, again, is supplemental to that. And you can even use it in such a way that you can use those video projectors to provide a full dome aspect. So what you can do is you can use the brute force star projector for your main star field work, describing the constellations, doing coordinate system understanding the layout of the sky, the motion of the Earth around the sun, or the apparent motions as they appear, and then use the digital planetarium system to do all the other great stuff, to take you up off of the Earth and take you out into the universe and help you understand some of the bigger and more complex things. So you can use these systems together. However, in a big theater, that's much more difficult to do because now you have a very heavy investment in a very big star projector and a very big video projection system. And that can be incredibly prohibitive to do. You know, those big projectors are on the order of $1 million+. So when you marry that with the video system, you're now talking $2.5 million. That's a heavy burden for many places to use as an investment for a medium that does not necessarily command the same kind of return in ticket sales as the IMAX theaters do. This is the thing that happened with IMAX, is IMAX became the cash cow. The planetarium lost its position as being the cash cow, so it's not drawing the revenue that the IMAX systems are and have been. Hopefully, planetariums will get back to that. But it requires a recognition by the institution of the great value of the digital planetarium system. With these immersive systems, I can go inside molecules. I can go inside aircraft. I can go inside cells in the body. I can go anywhere I want. So that means I can pull and provide access for different disciplines to use the visualization system and there provide much greater value. That's going on here at University of Michigan already. So that's a great step forward for places like this.
I'm curious about the application of the idea of story in the planetarium experience, and I'm trying to distinguish in my mind the difference between story, explanation, and experience.
So in my mind, the attempt is to help people understand. So there may be some explanation. You want the overall experience to be a pleasing one, and the vehicle that's often used for the explanation is some sort of story. Some sort of story that makes sense, hangs together, works well, and generally is just well constructed. So rather than taking a group of words and applying them to a set of disparate visuals, why not create a story of a phenomena or whatever it may be, and then create the visuals that allow the story and the visuals to flow well together. One enhances the other, rather than the images just being there, and let's just throw some words up as explanation for that. So in my mind, what we want to do is create an arc where we begin someplace, walk through something, and come to a conclusion that makes sense and ties things back together in a package that people can understand and carry away with them in a way that makes sense. So that's what I mean by story. It's, again, the phenomena, it relates to the phenomena of we have a group of CGI artists that are creating stuff because they can create it without the real need for why I need to have the explosion of this kind of object in space. Why not create a story about the life cycle of stars and then pull in or create what I need to feed that story in just the right way?
Going back to your point about the fact that these new full dome experiences allow us to move into other content areas beyond astronomy, planetariums generally, if you say planetarium, you think of astronomy, that's what they were built for. So do you find it problematic at all that we are moving into these other content areas, or do you still find that astronomy is still a very important part, or, I mean, problematic at all, really?
Yes, it is problematic. I think we hold on to the definition because of what we have been doing all of this time. I think that if the mission of your institution is specifically astronomy, then perhaps planetarium is an appropriate description. But then the question that we need to ask is, if you're going to go off and do these other things, how do you define yourself? So in the last couple of years, there have been these questions about, what do we really call this thing? What do we call this thing? Is it a visual presentation theater? Is it a digital theater? Is it well, there was at one time a thing called an atmospherium. And in the atmospherium of about 20 or 25 years ago, what was done is that these great full dome, these great movies of clouds moving through the sky, weather fronts and weather systems moving through the sky, were filmed and then projected through a fisheye lens onto the dome. And so you could study what was happening in weather, so it's called an atmospherium. So what do we do with a theater that has this great presentation capability, but can do astronomy, biology, geology, any of these different things, because you can take any kind of digital content, turn it into a visualization, and put it on the dome? Do we need to alter what our identity is? Yeah, some of us need to think about this. And in many ways, I also say that we don't know what we are. I think we have an identity crisis in the planetarium because we don't know what we are. What are we really? Are we just an astronomy theater? Or are we also a biology theater? Are we also a chemistry theater? Are we a geology? All these different kinds of possibilities, simply based on that one line that I said here, which is, we can do anything. The door, in some ways, is too wide open. Before, when it was just astronomy, oh, we're right in here. I can handle that. Wait, I can do all this other stuff? I look forward to the day when the institutions, such as this one, pick up on the fact that you can do all these different things. I think it will completely change the nature of how science institutions use these theaters. If you look at something like, I'm not going to remember the name of the digital globe where you can present digital geographic information. Science on a Sphere. Yeah, Science on a Sphere. Opened a lot of doors for people to show visualizations on a sphere. Well, wait, why didn't we do that in the planetarium? Because we were pigeonholed into astronomy. And we wanted to show it on this kind of sphere. We can certainly do that in the planetarium with 3D at much higher resolution, in fact. With much better results, I think, because you can create a story in that environment, and then you can mediate that in so many different kinds of ways. But I think we have an identity crisis in many ways. Now, question is, can you get other people in the planetarium industry to admit this? I think many people are absolutely stuck over here. I think other people are wild out here on the bleeding edge of stuff. And somewhere in the middle are those of us sort of wandering in the desert, trying to figure out what we can do.
It seems that you referred to the industry. I'd be really interested to hear you talk a little bit more about the individuals who are involved in this industry, the planetarians, and the implications that all this has for these individuals. I find some really interesting parallels between what's going on in museums now with curators, with regards to new skill sets that are required as the institution changes, new expectations, and the fact that they are needing to change with these changing expectations. And it seems that the future of, you described yourself as a dinosaur. You're not a dinosaur, but people who were trained in a certain context, having to sort of regroup and rethink what it is they're doing. It seems that what you were suggesting is that planetarians have sort of lost control of what goes on in their institutions with the advent of these production houses that are basically providing content that you simply turn a switch on and deliver, as opposed to playing this role of actually writing the scripts and telling the stories in each individual institution.
And this is part of the reason why I say that story is so important. Any good planetarium, in my belief, any good planetarium show is based on the story. This is a skill that planetarium people have developed from the time when planetarium programs turned into taped programs versus live lectures. The early history of the planetarium is the live lecturer from 1930 to about 1960, when the first taped planetarium show was created. From that point, now you're creating story. Well, this is a skill that a good planetarium must have somewhere in its toolkit in order to create good programming. Nowadays, what we've done, I think, is, again, this turn away from story, and let's look at this great equipment and great capability we have and play with all the great different things we can do there. As far as what happens with the staffing, if I had the planetarium, if I had today the planetarium staff I had 15 years ago, we could do nothing today. We could do the audio track, but we couldn't do anything else, because at the height of our glory, at the height of our capability at Fells, we had 2 technicians, 3 artists, 2 audio engineers, show producer, full cadre of volunteers. And we could create and 2 show producers and 2 staff photographers. We could create incredibly rich programming, beautiful imagery, just stunning stuff. But none of us have CGI skills. None of us have CGI skills. None of us are IT people. Oh, you should have seen what it looked like the first time we tried to create a CGI show. None of us knew a thing. We just had no idea what it was going to take to do this, just none whatsoever. And we learned the hard way through producing a really horrible show that we were not it. An entirely new skill set is needed. So on your staff now, you need somebody who can create a program. You need people who can do the actual astronomical instruction using the equipment that's available. In other words, they have a working knowledge of how to work with computer systems. But if you're going to produce your own programming, you need people who can do CGI work. You need people who are dedicated to CGI work, and you need the render capability to do this. So you have to have great IT skills in order to do all this stuff. So it's a totally different skill set in the production end. In the creation end, it's the story piece again. And so that, I think, should hang on, and does hang on. Obsolete for those of us who are from earlier eras? No, because those that are good from the earlier eras understand what a story is. We can convey that because of our skills as instructors in a planetarium environment. We can convey that story, hopefully, to those that are going to create the imagery that goes with it. That's what we hope. Thank you so very much for your kind attention. I greatly appreciate it.